welcome back to my channel, The Transparent Homeschool. My name is Beth, and if you've never been around here before, welcome. Let me introduce myself really quickly. I have 3 kids, and we homeschool 2 of them at the moment. And like I said in my previous video, I am doing kind of something really different and going through the birth stories of my children, and I'm going to start making some pregnancy content on here just because that's kind of the life stage I'm in right now. We are currently 5.5 months pregnant with this one, and so that's kind of where my headspace is right now, and I just kind of wanted to update you guys. And also, like I said in my last video, there's so much negative information about childbirth out there. That's all that we see on TV or in movies or anything like that, are just these negative stories of just people being in so much pain and all of that. And so there's kind of been this movement, I guess you could call it, of people trying to change that perspective. And I think that's great because childbirth is really an amazing thing. And the female body is just completely amazing in and of itself. And so if we can get the perspective on childbirth changed, I think a lot more women will be prepared, and kind of going into it with a little bit of a more accurate idea of what it is. So what I wanted to do is first, kind of like I said, give you my children's birth stories, and then kind of talk about where my husband and I are with this pregnancy and what our plans are. My son's birth was not traumatic in the sense of it scarred me from ever having children again, but it was eventful, and it did teach me really good lessons for when we got pregnant with my second, which is my my eldest daughter. And so this time around, we felt that we were a little bit more prepared as far as what could go wrong and how the hospital handles that when it does. If you remember from my last video, we had about an 18-hour labor with my son. Halfway through, my contractions stopped, and they gave me Pitocin, and then that's how the rest of the story went. My daughter actually has kind of a similar story to that, but I feel like this time I was a lot more prepared for what was coming and how to deal with that. But, you know, I guess you can never really be completely prepared until you're in the moment. So my son and my daughter actually have birthdays 8 days apart. It was really great planning on our part. When my son's birthday came, I was extremely pregnant, and I was just like, oh my goodness, please do not let them share a birthday. I can't, that's just mean. But thankfully, baby girl wanted to stay in about a week longer, which was perfectly fine by me. And she also followed the same pattern as my son, whereas my water broke first. And so that's how I knew that it was time to start getting things together and start getting all of our hospital bags together and making arrangements for child care, people watching our kids. Luckily, my parents were in the same house as us at the time, and so all I really had to do was just kind of wake them up, and they were ready to go to watch the kids. And my water broke at 4 a.m. and so everybody was still sleeping. It was just a very seamless kind of transition in that sense, whereas they were still asleep, and then my parents just kind of took over when everyone woke up in the morning. And so like I said in my last video, there are lots of lessons that we learned from my son to this labor and delivery, and the number one lesson that I learned was to eat before I went to the hospital. If you remember in my last video, I did not eat at all, and I passed out and even blacked out, and it was very hard for me to stay conscious after my son was born. I was not going to make that mistake this time. I told myself that I didn't really care if I was not supposed to eat or if that was a big deal. I was eating before we went to the hospital. And so after we called the hospital to tell them that my water had broken and that we were coming in, we had our hospital bag, the kids were taken care of, we got in the car, and I said, we are stopping by McDonald's on the way to the hospital. And so we were eating, I remember I got an Egg McMuffin, and I was so excited because I was like, I'm eating this time. and I'm not gonna make the same mistake again. So I enjoyed my delicious Egg McMuffin, and then we got to the hospital like around 7. Like, we weren't rushing because, again, my son's labor was 18 hours, and so I was like, I have time. So I took a shower. We took our dog out and all of this stuff. We took our time. We got breakfast. We sat in the car in the hospital parking lot, and we ate. We took our time, and we talked a little bit about kind of, what we wanted this birth to go like, and all that stuff. And I remember my husband asking me this time, he was like, last when Jonathan was born, you said no medicine, but then you changed your mind. And I was like, I want the same thing. There's going to be no medicine, no epidural or pain medicine of any kind, because now that I had been through a labor with Pitocin, like, it wasn't even just a regular labor, it was a labor brought on by Pitocin. I knew that I could handle anything. Like, I knew, yes, there might be pain, and yes, it might be overwhelming, but I could handle it. My body was designed to do this, and I could tackle it. They got me checked out. They got me through triage, into a room, and all of that. And I would say contractions started about 7:15, 7:30, like a little bit after we got there. And they lasted again until about 9. And then they stopped again. So this happened a second time, guys. I was really disappointed, and I knew it was coming if I couldn't get my contractions to start back up and labor to keep progressing normally without medicine. I knew that they were going to put me on Pitocin again, and I did not want that. I wanted to avoid that at all costs. So we walked. We did a few exercises that I have kind of prepared, before my daughter was born. Like, we did some research, not too much research, but a little bit. And I was like, this isn't going to happen again. Well, at 12 o'clock, it wasn't happening. So from 9 to 12, I had 3 hours to try to kickstart my contractions again. It wasn't working, and so I was begging them. I mean, I remember begging them, like, please let me have more time. Let me have more time to try getting into the water. But that was a whole thing. For some reason, the nurses would not let me get in the water. I don't know why. So we had booked a room with a jacuzzi tub for the purpose of laboring in the bathtub, and I don't know why they said I couldn't do it. I don't remember, but I was not allowed to get into the tub, which was a huge disappointment. But they were like, you can keep walking and you can keep like bouncing on the birthing ball and trying all of these things. We'll come back in around 1:30 and check your contractions, check your progress, and we'll make decisions based off of that. So they graciously gave me another hour and a half to kind of get things going, and unfortunately, at 1:30 when they came back in, nothing had happened and I had not dilated anymore. And so, enter Pitocin again. This is the second time that I had to have Pitocin for restarting my labor, and I was really disappointed because it just, I wanted my body to do I just wanted my body to do it, but apparently it needed help. So they started me about 2 o'clock on Pitocin, and from 2 to 3-ish, I was really kind of, it was intense. It was not as bad as last time, just because I had that knowledge of what they felt like the contractions with Pitocin. With my son, I had no idea, and so that's, I think, why they were a lot worse than this time. With my daughter, I knew what to expect, and so I was really prepared with breathing, and I was really prepared kind of with, like, just the whole atmosphere of the room in general. I had asked my nurses as we were doing Pitocin, like, as things progress and I get quiet, because as your contractions get more intense and your body is really getting ready to push baby, everything, you get quiet. Like, you can't speak through your contractions, and you really are trying to recover from your contraction when it's over until the next one. And so there's not really a whole lot of like verbal communication coming from you. And so I kind of wanted to mimic that in the room. And so I had asked the nurses and everybody, like, if you come in, try to like keep your voices down and speak to my husband when you can. Like, please don't try to bother me. They were very respectful of that. So low voices and breathing. And I also had them turn the lights down in the room. I remember that. We had the lights low voices, and I was breathing a lot more. And the other thing, and I was doing different like movements in bed. Now I did have the thing strapped to my belly, the baby monitor, and I had my IV in, and I had the thing on your finger that does your pulse. So I was limited in my mobility in that way, but I did try as much as I could to move around in bed. I remember rocking back and forth a lot sitting up, and I remember being on all fours in my bed, rocking back and forth, and that seemed to help too. Now, the other thing is, after the Pitocin was administered and my IVs were finished, I had asked them if I could take a few minutes to walk around my room without the IV pole. They said yes, as long as it wasn't like too long, just a few minutes would be fine. And so they had unhooked my the port, or the port that was in you, and I got to walk around for about 10 minutes with my husband, and that really helped too. So this time around, I was a lot more prepared for just like distractions and diversions to take my mind off of the intensity of the contractions. And so as far as like pain level, they were not as bad as when I was in labor with my son. And the other thing is I had a phrase. And so you'll see this kind of as one of like the tips for having like a really easy and not pain-free, but just manageable birth, is having like a mantra or a phrase that you kind of like think about and you repeat to yourself when you're having your contractions. And so I did have one of those phrases, and my husband and I had agreed on it together before we were like in labor. Like, I mean, this was like weeks before my daughter was born, that we agreed, like, we need to have like a phrase that we could like say to each other and that you can say to me when I need it. And so the phrase that he and I agreed on, and it's really funny because we had just watched God's Not Dead, the movie. And so our phrase was, God is good all the time. And then the other one would say, all the time, God is good. And we would just kind of mimic that back and forth to each other. And so that was kind of what I focused on, is I would just keep saying that to myself. It was out loud when I was able to speak, but then when a contraction came and I went like internal, I would say it in my mind all the time. And so those lessons that I learned from my son's birth really helped this time. And I was a lot more conscious for everything because I had eaten before we went, but also this labor was shorter. So like 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock were these heavy contractions, and then at like 3:15, 3:20, I really had the urge to push. And it's just, once you've done it, you kind of know when things are starting. And so I knew that my body was getting ready. I knew in a few minutes I would be holding my baby. And so I told the nurse, I said, I think I need to push. And she said, okay, let's get the doctors in. And I was actually really surprised at how quickly the doctors got in there. And so just maybe 5 to 7-ish minutes later, they had all come in. They were all dressed, ready to go. And I got to push out my baby girl. And I just remember thinking to myself after she was born, like, this was so much like more enjoyable. The contractions were intense and they were a bit painful, just again because of the Pitocin, but I knew that I could do it and there was no other option for me. Like, I knew my body was completely capable of birthing this child with Pitocin or without Pitocin. My body was built to do it. And I just remember because of, again, my son, just being so empowered and so like pumped and ready to go to have my daughter. And so when she was born, everything was different. I mean, last time I was blacking out all over the place and like I couldn't stay awake and I was like super like starving hungry. This time it was completely different. I was hungry just because our labor was about 8 hours. It was about half the time that my son took. It was such a new experience for me from my son. It was I would call it a positive experience just because I knew I could do it. I knew that I was capable of it. I knew that my body was powerful enough to do it. Again, with Pitocin or without Pitocin, I knew that I could do it. And so that's my positive birth story. I had her in a hospital. I had her unmedicated. And I knew that if I had any more children, I could do it. And that's just the story of my second child. And boy, I love listening to positive birth stories, and I think it's really important for us as pregnant women to surround ourselves with these stories and these testimonies of women who have done it. Like if you are wanting to have an unmedicated birth, you need to surround yourselves with other people who had unmedicated births, because like that's the message that you're going to be thinking about, and that's the place that your head and your heart is going to be in, is I can do it because someone else did it. So that's the birth story of my daughter. The next video I will be talking about my miscarriage that I had. That would be our third child, and make sure you guys tune in for that, because again, I think we need to talk about it. I think there is a big community of women who share this this occurrence in their life, and it is hard, but I think if we surround ourselves with positivity and women who experience what we do, then I think that there can be lots of healing and lots of positivity that comes from that. So make sure you are watching out for that video, and I will see you later. Bye!